Good morning from Eagle River, Wisconsin. I woke up early this morning about 4:30 because this story was on my mind. It's a true story from my trip on Lake Michigan, and it was pretty dramatic what happened, and I wanted to share it with you. Kind of giving it a name, a few different names. One is the mysterious case of the lost tracking dots. And if you look at my tracker, you can see how I've gone across the lake and then get to the other shore, and then there's a missing section of dots. That's what this story is about, those missing 3 miles of tracker dots. The other name that I have for it was Lost on the Shores of Lake Michigan. And then the final one is UP Hospitality, Upper Peninsula, or UPer Hospitality. So this is my story of the case of the missing dots, the mysterious case of the missing dots. And it isn't a story, it's actually true. I came across from Lansing Shoals Lighthouse about 12 miles straight across to a point called Patterson's Point, which is the most prominent point along Lake Michigan, up on that northeast side and northwest side. And it's a jutting little area you can see from Google Earth, and it was very obvious. So as I left Lansing Shoals Light, I got out my Garmin device and which Bluetooth to my phone, and I lined it up with Patterson Point. I looked down at my compass, got the heading, and then put away the electronics and just followed the heading. And as I got about halfway there, paddling was going very well, maybe 2 foot waves maybe. I could see Patterson Point, so obvious. So the whole time, and that's important in the story, is that I could see clearly this jutting piece of land called Patterson Point. So all I had to do was just dead reckon and paddle directly towards it, which is what I did. And so, after a couple hours, I land on Patterson's Point. And I looked down in the water, and there's some old concrete slabs, and I found out later that this was once a dock, and all the material for Lansing Shoals Lighthouse was brought out from that point. But now it's all grown over and it's just a forest. So it was kind of dangerous there, so I went a little bit around the corner, still out on the peninsula, this little spike of land, and found this really nice campsite back in there. So I unload my board, set up my tent, set up my camp, firewood, getting ready for the fish extravaganza meal I'm gonna have that night. And then I climb in my tent, take a nap. I wake up about 3 o'clock, and I think now is time to get out and fish. Usually the fishing's better later in the day. So here's where the mistakes start coming in. After surviving 7 days out in the open lake with all kinds of crazy stuff, here's where I made a mistake. I decide, since this is such a prominent point, I can't miss it. So what I'll do is just get on my paddleboard with just my fishing pole, and I will just head north along the coast. It's beautiful, there's rugged, good fishing. So I get on the board just in a pair of shorts and a thin shirt, no cell phone, no GPS, no lights, nothing, no food, nothing, no water, because I'm just going for a little fishing trip. So I head on up the coast, and it's beautiful. There's a sunken old petrified raft, huge raft, probably from a few hundred years ago. Wanted to come back and get a photo of that, and didn't do very well fishing for some reason. But I kept going, and around one cove, and the next cove, and the next cove, and suddenly I look, and the sun is kind of getting down on top of the trees now. And I think, it's good time to get back to Patterson Point. So I go out a little deeper, and I think maybe I'll have better luck fishing out there. So instead of going along the coast, I sort of cut a beeline for what I thought was Patterson's Point. So I'm fishing, I'm not doing any good. Finally I say, forget that, it's getting late. So I start beelining for my campsite. Past 1 point, 2 points, 1 cove, 2 cove, 3 coves. Now I'm getting a little fuzzy about how many coves did I pass. And the interesting thing on the perspective is, and this is one of the lessons I learned in this story, is as I was coming directly at it, it was very, very obvious it was prominent. But when you turn and go up along the coast and there's many, many points and you get a different perspective, it no longer looks any different than any other point, and it didn't. So I suddenly get this intuitive feeling like, you're getting about where it should be, But I go around this point, I look down for the concrete, I don't see the slabs, I go around the corner and there's a public beach. And there's a lady, 2 kids, and a man there. And then I think I'm really in trouble now because I did not pass any beach. I don't remember going by this at all. So I paddle over to them and I say, I'm a little panicked. I need to get to Patterson Point. It's getting late. Can you tell me? And he says, well, I grew up here. I know everything about it. I fished every cove along this coast. I said, well, you're my man. I said, where is Patterson Point? And he looks south. He goes, you still have 2 more coves to go. And I said, are you sure? I think I've already gone too far. And he said, no, I'm telling you, I've fished it many times. It's 2 more miles down. So now I'm looking kind of like, what do I do? It's dark now, and I turn on the lights on my paddleboard. I did have little lights on the front, on the bow and stern, and I just take off. And I said, well, he grew up here, so off I go. 1 mile, 2 miles. Now it's pitch black, and I'm lost. And I'm out on the, not out deep. I'm right on the coast, but so I'm starting to go into survival mode now, like, oh dear, I'm gonna have to crawl under some leaves. Mosquitoes are biting me now. I'm gonna have to crawl under some leaves and just make my way, get through the night alive, and then I'll paddleboard up and find my camp. Well, I see a light on the beach, 1 light, and so I paddle to it, pull up my board with the lights on, grab my paddleboard, and I'm looking pretty rough now, and dehydrated and hungry. And I walk up to the porch, and there's this young woman and 2 little kids in there, and she just looks at me like, who are you? And I knock on the door, and trying to make it, dun da da dun da, kind of like that, and suddenly her husband comes out, and he cracks the door open, and says, what can I do for you? And I tell him my little story that I'm basically alone out here and overshot my campsite. He opens the door, brings me in. His wife brings me some tangerines, after they'd asked me a few questions, of course. Give me some water. He gets on the phone. He calls his friend and says, there's a way we can drive you to Patterson Point, at least close to it. I said, I don't know how that could be because there's no roads. And he said, well, there is one that's close. It turns out it was the road to the park I just mentioned. So I'm kind of flabbergasted that they're going to do that. He said, normally we'll let you stay here, but we're renting this. This isn't our home, and it probably isn't a good idea, proper for us to do that. So I said, no, I'm very grateful. So I get in the car with these 2 guys. We drive through these sandy roads, miles, 10 or 15 minutes, 20 minutes maybe, and come right down to the beach in the pitch black. We don't know where we are on Patterson Point. The other lesson I learned is this point has actually 3 tiny little points on it. So we get out, we turn right, and we quickly realize using his phone that we're heading the wrong way. Now we go the other way. We're walking, along the beach, and then all of a sudden we're walking in the water up to our knees and then crossing a river. And I'm saying, guys, you don't have to go, just go back. And they said, no, we're not going to leave you. They keep going with me until they basically get me to my campsite, and say, well, we'll meet you tomorrow here at 8 o'clock because we're going to have you come over and have breakfast. And so I'll get in my tent. Thank you, I'm alive. I'm here. I'm safe. I go fall asleep. get up in the morning. I did put my garbage up in the tree, and a bear came that night. It's another little side story. And when I got up, all the garbage was gone. But that's another story. So 8 o'clock, all the bags are packed. I carry them down the beach, and I sit there. And sure enough, right at 8 o'clock, this car pulls up, and and I take my gear, and we go back the road to their cottage. And now their families are there. There's the two little kids, Ada and Landon, are making homemade donuts, and they're asking me if I want sweet or savory. And I have donuts and coffee, and sit and talk for a couple hours with them. It was like they were my family. When I left, we hugged and took a photo of us all, and I got on my paddleboard, and of course the paddleboard stayed there all night on the beach. So that's the mystery of the missing dots, is that 3-mile section that we drove around. I wasn't so obsessive, although I did think about it, about going back, to that spot and then coming down the coast. I just let it be, and actually it's given me a great segue to tell the story of the missing dots and the hospitality of these incredible people in the UP, and also just the lessons that I learned, which I've kind of already shared. But basically, when you're out alone, don't just get on your board and go for a little fishing trip. Everything out there is a big deal, and I should have taken my phone and my GPS, a bottle of water, some insect repellent, and then I should have put a flag out on the tree limb hanging out from the point. And then finally, the idea of perspective, which is, I'm kind of new. I'm a swimmer and a kayaker, but this big lake type nautical thinking I'm not as familiar with. And now I'm getting more familiar about perspective, that, depending on where you're coming from, one thing can look prominent. You turn your 90 degrees and it looks just like everything else down the beach. So a lot of good lessons, and it's added. I got up this morning and read about the voyagers, the Canadian fur trappers who came down in the canoes and back in the 1800s, and then of course the Native Americans that had been doing that as well in canoes, and I have such respect for what it took. And they had no equipment, they had no electronics, they had no insect repellent, they didn't have modern clothing, and they just had to make these little smudge fires and smear stuff over them, bear oil and things that they'd learned from the Indians, but still would get eaten all night long. And so I'm thankful to my friends that helped me, and I wanted to tell that story in honor of them and UP hospitality. That's my story from Eagle River, Wisconsin. Bye.